Well, everyone seems to be talking about integrated handlebars, the stem, the way that the actual fork is attached to the stem, and the concealing of the cables. Now, there's a few designs that are on the market, and they're creating a few issues that people are actually focusing on. So let's roll that intro, and let's just have a look at these integrated handlebars and the concealing of the cables, and really what are these issues that they're going on about. Well, integrating the cables through the stem, down past the fork and into the frame or back into the fork is not as simple as it actually seems on the surface. And when you actually start to look at the complication of how that needs to be designed, you actually see why there's limitations. Now, there seems to be a couple of different designs. One where they're running all the cables down the side of the fork, and the other one is where they're running the fork cable down the top of the fork and they're running the frame cables down the side of the fork. Now, with integrating the cables into the stem and down through the fork and into the frame and then back into the fork so they're completely concealed, is not such a simple process as it may seem. And it's quite complicated to do that because you have two moving parts that are moving and you need to get the cables past those moving parts. So therefore you either got to limit the steering or you've got to have something that can spin right around and house those cables. Now, there's a number of different designs. There's ones where they use a bung that fits in the top bearing and it has a space in it for the cables to go through, and then the internal diameter of that bung is the diameter that houses the fork. Some of the other designs are using a D shape, where they have a D-shaped fork. Some other designs are actually running the fork cable down the top of the fork. So there's a number of different ways manufacturers are tackling this. Now, unlike the old systems where we used to have the cables running externally and not in the stem and not in the fork, and we had our bung plug and our clamping system, so that was all very secure, and the fork sat straight in the bearing. But with these new designs, the limitations are, one, they may need to limit the amount the handlebar turns because of the way the design is. They haven't got that much space when the cables are going into the frame or back into the fork, that those cables are going to get sliced or damaged. And the other problem is that if they're running the fork cable down the top of the fork, they can't use the traditional type of bung system where we have a plug and then the stem is clamped on and the actual bung supports that clamping. So they have to come up with a different system if they're not using a bung like the FSA system. So what they might need to do is make that top part of the fork reinforced by using another piece, or they're actually making the carbon fork thicker and they have to make it heavier. And then you've actually got other designs like the Cervelo S5, but I'll leave that alone at the moment because that uses a pin steering system. So that's quite a bit different, but that actually uses a stop to the amount of steering, the same as the Cannondale system does. So why does this create a problem? Well, the first problem is if you have a stop, you've got to think about how you're going to limit the amount that the handlebar turns. And the systems I've been using at the moment are just by having like a tiny little stop that impacts the actual frame at a very small area. And if you drop your bike or the handlebars are twisted sharply like that, then it's going to damage your frame and then your bike's for the tip. The other problem is if you don't have a plug in the top of the fork because you're running the fork cable down the top of the fork, then you can't use a bung and you can't use that clamping system. So then you need to design some different type of clamping system. And some of these systems are a bit questionable. And one of those systems is the Canyon system that's on the Canyon Air Road. The poor Air Road, it's getting a hammering, unfortunately. But Peak Talk actually did a video on that one. And if you've known anything about engineering, it's a little bit of a worry and a head scratch, that one. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but the way that they're using one clamping device onto a cutaway fork worries me a little bit. So go and check Pete Talk's video out up here, and you can go and have a look at that one. But what this all means is to have this really nice finish where the cables are concealed. And let's be real about this. People do like to have their concealed cables. I mean, I watched a video on Bastian Cycles, and they get that question all the time. You know, can we have a headset where the cables are concealed? Because it looks super neat, and when you look at the stem and the spaces, it looks really slick. But the problem is making a design that's actually going to be strong, and it's going to take that front loading of that fork stresses. So you've got your arms and your handles, your movement like this, and you've also got the fork movement as well. And you also need to protect the cables inside from damage from the movement of the actual handlebars. And that actually is the challenge for the manufacturers. Well, in conclusion, we need to realise that these integrated stems where they're concealing all the cables are a massive design change, and manufacturers are taking quite different ways to solve the problems of getting the cables from the stem either into the frame or into the fork for the front brake. And some of them are doing that in different ways. They're doing it by taking all of them into the frame, going back into the fork, or some of them into the frame and then some into the top of the fork. So they're tackling this quite different, and how these different designs will stand up over time to sprinters and to heavier riders, we just don't know. And we hope that they've done some significant testing to make sure that these things are not going to fail on us, because if they fail, you're going to face plant the bitumen. That's the actual problem with mucking around with a design that we've used for many, many years, which has a plug that reinforces the fork, and we're clamping onto a fork that's completely supported inside by a plug, so it can't be crushed, so it gives you a good interface. Now, there is a big demand for these concealed cable designs, and I can understand that because the bikes look much neater. And I was just watching a video where I think it was Cycling Tips or someone like that. They were doing an interview with Bastian Cycles, and they've spent the last 2 years designing their own integrated concealed cabling system because people want it and there's a demand for it. So all you people out there are asking for this technology, but my issue is with it, these are very new systems, and they're quite different to what we've been using before. Now, at the moment, we've still got choices. I mean, one day we may not have choices, they'll all be designed, but hopefully then one particular design will stand out. Like, you know, we have the DC Swiss hubs that are really easy and everyone likes them. So hopefully there'll be a design that stands out so it works really well. But at the moment, we have a number of designs, and I'm not really prepared to take a risk on something that if it fails, if your handlebars fail, that handlebar comes off, you lose complete control of the bike, and you're probably going to face plant the bitumen. So it's a very, very crucial part of the bike, and if it fails, you can actually suffer considerable injuries depending on the situation and how fast you're going. So guys, you let me know down below what you think of these designs, and are you prepared to actually buy these bikes and have these concealed handlebars? Because you go, yep, it just looks beautiful, and you know, a failure is probably a small thing, and I'm willing to take that risk. Or no, I like to use the older stuff, which has been proven, where we have the plug and it's supported and the stem's clamped onto that, so there's nothing that really can go anywhere. Well, anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it, guys, and I'll see you next vid. Remember to ring that bell up here, and catch you next vid. Cheers.